Welcome to Higher Edification, a podcast featuring college presidents and other leaders in the higher education space. And we're going to be talking about the state of higher education, as well as different challenges and opportunities and ways that we kind of go about our business here in the world of higher education. I'm Dan Myers. I'm your host. I'm the president of Misericordia University in Pennsylvania. I'm also known as President Dan on TikTok. And I am delighted to welcome our guest today, Wes Fugate, the president of Wilson College. So welcome, Wes. It's great to have you here on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on, Dan. I'm delighted to be a part of the conversation.
Well, let's start, Wes, by just talking a little bit about how we use media and things in our work. I note that both you and I were rated by Ed Marketing last year as being in the top 10 social media presidents in the country. And I don't think either of us quite know where that came from, but I was happy to have it said and thought, oh, this is another way to just engage people. But so maybe we could talk a little bit about how you use social media and different things as a president. It's not always the most natural thing people think of when they think about college presidencies, but we've been trying to make use of it. So I'm wondering how you approach that, how you think about that social media space these days.
Yeah, well, I formerly was a vice president for marketing and communications at one point in my history. And so I think a lot about the ways that institutions communicate with their various constituencies. And it's obvious that our younger constituencies have moved to primarily digital communication. But also, and my mother is a prime example of this, older populations are really addicted to Facebook. And so finding a way to reach the various constituencies was really important to me in my presidency as I began slightly before the pandemic. And that's important to note because it became a tool for me during the pandemic. I just think right now it's easy to find various ways to connect with people, but you've got to do it in multiple platforms and whether that be in person or in writing or via the various digital platforms to make truly meaningful relationships. And in my consideration has been think about each of these various platforms differently, and different constituencies might be engaged with a platform differently than they might in another. And so if you were to see my identity across the various platforms, it's quite different.
Uh-huh. Well, what are some of the platforms you use, and how do you target your activity on those? I mean, there's so many to choose from. I wonder which ones you use and which ones you think work best with the right kind of audiences.
Sure. So I actually give out a social media card to prospective students and their families. And when I'm handing it to them, I say, students, I'm on TikTok and Instagram for you. And parents, I'm on Facebook for you. And then I say, I'm also on Threads, but I don't do a lot with it. And honestly, not much good is coming from the X thing, formerly known as Twitter. So I'm not on that anymore. And so that's kind of a joke about how I think about it. But, I don't do as much in the written form as with Threads or with X, formerly known as Twitter, and maybe that's a space I should be in. But we have such a small team at Wilson, and I have such limited time that we decided I'm not trying to do social media to be a policymaker or an influencer in that regard. And that's a lot of what those platforms are used for. I wanted to use it to reach primarily parents, alums, prospective students, and our current students. And so I think of TikTok primarily for students and prospective students. Actually, we have a student who came to Wilson because she found me on TikTok, and she's from a foreign country. So I thought that was pretty impressive.
Wow.
So that identity is to get to know my personality. It's not very serious. Occasionally I'll do some serious talks, but it's a lot of me dancing with students or making fun of myself or talking about bow ties or being bald or whatever the case may be. It's really to develop a relationship with students, knowing that I'm traveling all the time or I'm, visiting with donors or in meetings, that I have a presence with them even when I'm not physically on campus.
Mm-hmm.
Instagram is a lot more about the identity of the institution, what we're trying to move forward, as well as some fun things. And again, targeting primarily a younger demographic, although I find that parents are often on Instagram because they're checking up on their kids. And so I do get some parents they're involved, although I have an 83-year-old trustee who also is very involved with Instagram. So, age is probably not a barrier. And then Facebook is really focused on parents and our alums. Most of my work for alums is built there. And so every time I'm visiting with one of our alum groups over lunch or dinner, we'll post a picture and that makes everybody feel good. Or if I'm in front of a beautiful landmark on campus. So we do try to differentiate and think about the strategy a little bit differently. I don't know how our alums would feel about some of the crazy dances that I do. So they don't get to see that unless they go to TikTok.
Well, that's something I was going to ask you is have you endured any criticism for doing this? Because I will say that I think that we are, it's not that there's a number of presidents who do this kind of stuff on social media, but we're in a severe minority in terms of using TikTok. There's only a couple handfuls of presidents that really are engaged on the TikTok platform. Do you get any criticism? You were just saying that some people wouldn't appreciate the dances. Have you had any of that kind of stuff, like the president's not serious enough or things like that?
I think it's a part of my personality. I am a very down-to-earth guy. The students call me Pres Wes rather than Dr. This or President that, and so I think our alums have come to expect that there's going to be some playfulness. I have a theater background, so it kind of lends itself a little bit to that.
Yeah.
So I think it's on brand for me and isn't as jarring. Of course, there have been some folks who don't necessarily love it, but I always push back and say, I'm meeting our students of today where they are, and our students love it, and that's what's important to me.
Yeah. Well, when we started, I was really targeting high school students. That was the idea, and we did a bunch of things to try to make that happen, and it worked. But it very quickly crept into our current students, not just prospective students, and it's been amazing how they perceive that as part of a real connection with me. I've been very surprised at that, how real it is, this little screen, how real that is to folks. And we didn't experience the world that way, of course, when we were growing up, but they do. And so it's I think been a pretty powerful way to actually get to people and have them feel like you know them and they know you a little bit,
It's an unbelievably powerful tool. People have learned about me as a person. They've learned about me as a leader. They can see self-deprecating humor. And then I squeeze in a talk about the FAFSA, and so it allows them to enter into a more serious conversation at the moments when I think it's really important and necessary. And it's really a cost-effective way to communicate. Folks are inundated with the free things in their lives right now, email, for example. And while most parts of social media are free, it's still a very effective tool to get the message out, much more so than print. And I'm known for my handwritten notes, but I can't possibly write that many handwritten notes and reach, the 44,000 people or whatever it was that saw me making a snow call and thinking that was funny. It is a really powerful way to connect with various constituencies. And because video is involved and imagery is involved, it evokes emotion in a way that print just can't quite do. And so I think it's, for our colleagues that aren't doing it, I know it's time consuming, and I know we all have different priorities, but I encourage them to think about it because it can be very effective.
It is time consuming. I think sometimes people watch a 15-second or 30-second TikTok and they think, well, that doesn't take any time. And ironically, some of the ones I've done off the cuff like that with no preparation at all have been some of the ones that have taken off the most. But it does take time, not only because you got to think through how to do it in the right way. And we, I don't know, I'm going to ask you in a second, how do you get your ideas and stuff? But also, one thing you got to do, you got to watch some TikTok to understand how it works and what might work there. That's time consuming. And so I'm always sort of, there's days when there's so much to do as a president, and you're like, oh, geez, now I got to make a TikTok, so it's an investment, but I found it to be worthwhile. And I've convinced some of my naysayers just with the raw numbers. My accounts had something like 6 million hits or something total across everything all the time I've been doing it now. And that's 6 million encounters with Misericordia that wouldn't have happened without it. So I think it has proven to be powerful. And I know we've gotten a few students, I know at least directly from engagement with our TikTok. And we have a university one too, then the team does a fabulous job with that. They do wonderful stuff. So, but where do you get your ideas from for TikTok, Wes? You doing dances and you come up on my feed all the time.
Yeah, it's I have to say, I don't know that I'm the best at this myself. So, I do try to get on TikTok, but I have to remember that TikTok's algorithms are so good that they are going to send me the things that they think I'm interested in. And that is different than what a 17 to 24-year-old might be interested in. Mm-hmm. And so, I get a lot of theater TikTok and, I identify as gay. So there's a lot of things that come to me via that avenue, So I spend a lot of time and I try to listen for sounds that I go, oh, that would be relevant in my world. But I also have a fairly young staff member in our marketing team who frequently will send me, hey, I think this could be really good for you. It's on trend. And of course, it's not on trend for me because I'm not seeing any of those videos because I am not a 17 to 24-year-old. And so it is helpful to have a young person who's seeing what college students might be seeing and saying, this is really trending right now, and I think you should get involved with it. You hit the right sound, and all of a sudden something can be really popular and you get swept up in that momentum. I just don't happen to be viewing all the things that are very popular.
That's interesting.
So I've got to lean on others.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Maybe I should open up another account where I'm pretending to be 15 or 16 or something, so I could see what they said to 15 or 16-year-olds. That's very interesting. Yeah, one thing I did, I started following a bunch of high school teachers because I figured their students would follow them and it would get me in their world. And that did work. I started getting more stuff, I think, that helped me when I did that. But it's an interesting world. There's no question about it. So, yeah. Well, there's lots of ways to engage students on campus. I know you're great at it. And one of them for you is your cat. Tell me about your cat and how that works on your campus, how you put that feline presence to work for you in connecting with folks.
Yeah, well, again, having come from a marketing background, we spend a lot of time thinking about my brand as a president and the brand of the institution. And so it's rare not to see me in a blue bow tie or a lapel pin on, or that's just part of who I am. And when I met with the team, the day I was being announced as president, I said, what do I need to talk about in order to endear myself to the community? And the first answer was, you need to talk about your cat. For those who don't know Wilson College very well, we are known for animal programs. And so we are particularly strong in veterinary nursing, equine studies, equine facilitated therapeutics, animal studies, biology, pre-vet, lots of animal programs. We have over 400 animals on campus.
Wow.
Many that we own: cats, dogs, birds, guinea pigs, rodents, you name it, chickens, horses, lots and lots of animals. And then we have a liberal pet policy. So people are really excited about all things animals. We have a blessing of the animals by our chaplain. I mean, it
Oh,
really
nice.
is a part. We give out pet bandanas. I mean, it really is a part of the institution. And so I started to talk about Miss Scarlet, and of course, it became a thing. And some dramatic moments happened in our first week living in the president's house, which here is called Sharp House, that made it easy to tell stories. Literally, the day the moving truck was arriving, she disappeared and got stuck in the walls, um, and she had found a hole somewhere that had not been covered up, I guess, and was stuck between the second and first floor.
Oh, no.
And literally, I had to call the physical plant director and say, "Hi, I'm Wes. I'm the new guy. Can someone come help me get the cat out of it?" And so the moving truck, the moving truck wasn't stopping. They were moving things in. We're lifting her kitty condo up in the air. 4 grown men lifting condo. I'm up on a ladder. By the way, this is in January, so I'm in cold air coming in, and we're pulling the cat out of a can light right in the foyer of the house. So that was a great story to like introduce people to the cat. And the second story is the house has a bat problem, and so that very first night, she brought a bat to bed.
Oh my
I had an entirely white duvet cover. It was no longer entirely white, and
God.
it was pretty dramatic. And so that allowed me to immediately say, "Oh, I've had such a warm welcome, and so has Miss Scarlett," and tell stories about her. Well, that eventually turned into our marketing team saying we'd like her to write a column in the magazine.
Oh, wow.
Um, and of course, somebody has to write that, and I won't say who it is, but they get to know the cat pretty well. And she's a Southern lady. We came from Georgia and then Virginia, and so she takes on a Southern personality, and she communicates to our constituencies things that are going on campus through the eyes of the first feline. And we thought it was a one-shot deal, but it became so popular that we now have it in every single magazine. And so,
Wow.
as we sit here today, the author is writing a column about her latest adventure, which was to go to New York City and scope things out before we take our alums to Wilson on Broadway. And so we literally have pictures of her in Times Square and in Central Park and those sort of things.
Oh,
So
wow. That sounds like a great engagement tool too. Do you take her out and meet her? She meets students and people?
yeah, so originally that was not the plan because she's a little spicy, but we ended up investing in a kitty stroller. And so when I go on my walks around campus, sometimes she comes with. And oh, she's very popular. People want to come to events at the house just to see her. And when there's an event, like for example, we host a lawn party or a garden party the day before commencement. One day it rained, and a parent was furious that I did not bring the cat to the rain location because she had been reading about the cat and wanted to meet the cat. And I was like, well, we're kind of in the middle of commencement. Things are busy. So it is amazing that people have connected with her in such a way.
Yeah.
Reunion, people get very excited when they come back and get to meet her.
Wow.
So yeah, she's got a personality of her own. And of course, you have to start thinking about if you've developed this identity, she's 16. We also have to think about how she might one day say goodbye to her readers. And so we actually
Yeah.
have already a plan for that unfortunate moment, which will be very difficult for me. But
16 years.
it all is a part of the strategy to make me, because she talks about her dad all the time, but also to personalize me, but also to share the messages of the college. So, for example, recently she wrote, my dad keeps saying he's not home very often because he's in a campaign. Dear readers, can you help him in this campaign? And so she's actually received several donations and has her own letterhead to send send thank you notes. So
Wow, that's amazing. Using the cat as an advancement officer. Wow, that's great. Wes, I would have thought of that, but that's incredible. But that just proves how engaging it is. I always think it's one of the kind of perversities of college campuses is that there's no animals. Not your campus, obviously, but the typical campus. There's no animals. There's no little kids, and our students miss those kinds of presence in their lives so much. And whenever there's dogs or whatever on our campus, they just get mobbed by students because they miss that so much. And so I'm always trying to, like find ways to bring animals and welcome kids. We love to have the families come on campus. Our coaches will bring their kids to practices and things. It's really good for everybody, I think, to have that kind of thing. And you're just proving it so many different ways with this experience with your cat. So.
Well, we follow the science here. We're in significant mental health challenges. The animals are unbelievably beneficial to help lowering anxiety and stress and those sort of things. So that pays dividends. And it's funny that you mentioned kids because we actually have a program that allows single parents to study on our campus. So we have kids around all the time in our dining hall, and we do special events for them. And you're right, it brings a different life and energy to our campus.
It does too, and it reminds students that they're not just in a college, but they're part of a real world where I think people behave differently when there's little kids around, and they watch their language more and things like that, and it's good to have that reminder of how we are part of a bigger world, and I think it's wonderful. So now I'm going to ask you about the bow tie because you brought it up. So you're my second bow tie aficionado on this podcast. The first was Jonathan Green from Susquehanna, and so is this something that you thought up as part of your self-presentation for this presidency, or are you a long-term bow tie fan?
I have worn them for maybe a decade or so now, but I have to admit that the idea was planted in my master's degree at Vanderbilt University. Then Chancellor Gordon Gee is a masterful communicator, and we actually studied him and we talked about his brand, largely built around the bow tie. He speaks at a conference, you walk out, they hand you a bow tie cookie. So I started to really think about my brand as part of watching his presidency. And so I knew that as I got closer to a presidency that I wanted to lean into the bow tie. It makes you identifiable. I mean, I don't have to worry about if I'm meeting a new donor or supporter somewhere in a restaurant, they can pick me out from anywhere. So it has been a part of me for several years now, and I haven't worn a straight tie since I made the change.
Wow, that's impressive. I have thought about that branding issue myself. I chose the quarter zip route. I'll do this or do this with a tie underneath it, and it's my attempt to try to get in you talked about this a little bit too, just kind of get in that space where you're not quite so formal and distant, where automatically when people know you're a college president, there's this kind of barrier that goes up almost immediately, and they don't quite know how to interact with you as a person. And so I picked this one, but the bow tie has a different route. It's funny that you mentioned Gordon Gee. I've had several. I was at Ohio State when he was at Ohio State, and my boss at Notre Dame, Tom Burrish, was the provost at Vanderbilt when Gordon was the president there. So I've known him a couple different ways over my life. And when I don't know if you saw, but I sent you a little prep thing, and I actually said something about Gordon Gee. I pretended like I was interviewing him to show you what the setup would be. It's so funny that you have that connection to him as well.
Yeah, and what a great person to have a connection to. I mean, while many may debate some of the decisions he's made, I think you can really see intentional strategy around how you communicate and create a brand for yourself.
Absolutely, 100% true. There's no question about it. And he really does have an image like no other. And I mean, in a sense, I mean, he's one of the most interesting and successful college presidents of all time. I mean, he's been a college president for, I think, 40 years or something, and 6 or 7 different institutions, 2 times at Ohio State, 2 times at West Virginia. I mean, he's really been around and done some amazing stuff at some of these places. So yeah, he's a very interesting character. I have a Cat Gordon Gee story.
Oh, wow. Combining it all.
I'm putting it all together here. When I was at Ohio State, took my cat to the vet, and we were coming back and set the medicine on top of the car, and we were kind of struggling with the cat, and we were and so we forgot, we left the medicine on top of the car, and we're driving down the street trying to control this cat, and Gordon Gee pulls right up beside us, and he honks and he points. He's like, the medicine's on top of the car. And so he saved our cat.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I'm sure he doesn't remember that, but it's one of those things that stuck in my mind, of course. A very nice little gesture on his part that made my life better. So
small things can go a long way, and it made a huge impact.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So now another thing you said, Wes, and we're spending all our time on engagement, but I just think you're so good at it. I just wanted to keep exploring it, and it's something I think that others could listen and get a lot from your experience. So, but you mentioned going to New York and taking a group to go see musicals, and you have a musical theater background yourself, and so this is another thing that you're leveraging in some way. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you've done and how you look at that and how you use that in your work as president.
Yeah, so my undergraduate degree was in dramatic arts and economics. At one point, I thought I'd be an arts administrator, and fortunately, a college president at the time said to me, "Have you thought about doing college administration as a job?" And so my path was diverted, and I think that was a great decision because I love being in the business of transforming students' lives. But you still have the itch to always be connected to the arts, and so I will have to admit it has not been something I've been easily been able to connect to during the early years of my presidency. It was the pandemic. I was overwhelmed. And in president's school, as I like to call it, they really talk to you a lot about finding that one thing that will cause you to stop thinking about your job for just a second. Find the thing that will bring you unbelievable joy and cause you to step away. And in the past year, I was able to become really good friends with a couple of Broadway producers, and my husband does some work in New York City, and so I have gotten to see a lot of shows, and so now I am actually into the world of investing in theater, and most excitingly is I'm joining their producing team for a new musical that will debut next year in England. We'll do the out-of-town tryout in Manchester in June, and then hopefully the West End next calendar year, and then hopefully Broadway. So if you hear about the musical Burlesque, think of me.
I was going to ask you what it was called. Okay, Burlesque. We're going to keep
Burlesque, based on the 2010 film. If you remember the 2010 film,
okay.
With Christina Aguilera, Cher, Stanley Tucci.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so I'm very excited. And Christina Aguilera is executive producing on the project as well, so that's pretty exciting. But the cool thing is, as we kept saying, how do we connect our alums and families to this passion of mine? So the producing team said, we'd like to do a day with your alums and have a behind the scenes experience. And so we're going to go to Broadway the day before the Tony Awards. So everything will be a buzz as people are last minute campaigning. Mm-hmm. We're going to see 2 of their shows. They have 4 that are in this season, 3 that are still running. Merrily We Roll Along, which is a big hit. The Who's Tommy, which appears to be a big hit, and The Outsiders, which I think is also going to be a big hit. So they're having
Mhm.
a big year. The only one that didn't fare as well was Here Lies Love. But they are going to introduce us to artists behind the scenes. We're going to get to see some fight choreography and learn how that happens. We're going to do a sing along with a Broadway star. We're going to have a talk back after one of the shows. We're going to have a session where we talk about the business of Broadway, and this gives our donors and supporters and parents of the students, faculty members are joining us, a chance to have an experience that they only would get because of their connection to Wilson College. And so I'm really excited about it.
That's fantastic. Wes, can I come?
No, please. Yeah, we'd be glad to actually there are a few people from outside Wilson who've just said, I want to come to this. And so we do have some
wonderful.
extras.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Well, I think what it goes to is we've got to find new ways to connect with our various constituencies.
Mhm.
And so you try to take the things that you're passionate about and use that as a tool to connect. And so two other ways that we've been able to do that. We have an arts fest here on our campus. We don't have theater as a program, but the faculty said, would you ever be willing to do a play? And so a couple of weeks ago, we did a staged reading of a play that I starred in and had students and staff participating in, and it was a lot of fun. And then we're actually taking the passions of my spouse. So my husband is a travel person. He often leads study abroad trips for colleges and universities. And the Alumni Association asked, of the 56 countries you've been to, what's your favorite one and will you take us there? And so in the fall, we're actually going to take some alums to Croatia. And so, finding different ways to connect, I think, is really, really important, because post-pandemic, the world changed dramatically. And the way that we would have connected with people before is different, and it's changing. And we're trying to use every tool that we can to connect with all types of students, faculty, or all constituencies, faculty, staff, students, alums, local townspeople, you name it. We're getting them all involved.
Well, let me ask you about one other group, and that's the faculty and staff, not the students, but the faculty and staff. People who work at your college. There's another challenge there for us because, in a sense, we kind of everybody's boss. And so sometimes it's hard to connect with people in a very person to person friend kind of way, because there's always that overlay of the power differential because of the hierarchy at the college and university. What are some of the things you do to try to connect with the faculty and the staff at your school?
Yeah. So again, you can imagine I was here 77 days before I sent everyone home for the pandemic. Yeah. And so it was really tough at first. We were doing Broadway sing-alongs via Zoom. We were having happy hours, whatever we could come up with. When we started to return in person, we would have these socially distanced outdoor lunches to be able to do it. But I think a big part of how I've connected with our faculty and staff is to be unbelievably transparent with them. Sometimes they would say to a fault. I do 5 town hall meetings a year where I walk them through what I call the bad, the ugly, and the good. The bad is typically having to do with the federal or state government and the various regulations that they are imposing upon us. You can imagine there's been a lot to talk about recently in that regard. That could take the whole town hall meeting. The ugly, closures and mergers. I don't even talk about the cuts. That's just we'd be there for days on end. But I want them to be aware. If they're not reading the higher ed literature, I want them to understand the dynamic of what's happening to our ecosphere as far as post-secondary education. Some of them are ready for me to stop that. And when I do my next one in June, actually, they're going to be really frustrated because the list since our last one in February has become very long. Yeah. But then I get to good. And I walk through each strategic imperative of our strategic plan and talk about all of our accomplishments. And, it might be running through line by line of the budget. It might be whatever it may be. And then I open the floor for questions, and I'll I jokingly say, let's play Stump the President, and see if you can ask a question that I don't know the answer to, and then I'll get back to you. I also have tried to be as personable as I can. So, when I came, everybody wanted to use the formal title. And I said, look, we are coworkers. Unless we're in front of students or we're in a formal setting, please call me Wes. That's been hard for some people, but President Wes or Pres Wes has picked up. And then I'm not bashful about sharing the challenges that I face as a president, the personal side of the job, that people have walked into our home because they think it's a public building. You got to make sure that door's locked all the time. Lesson learned. And so those little things, they make you real and they make you personable. And then whatever I can do to entertain people at the house or take them out in town to get to know them as individuals, I take that opportunity as well. In fact, next week we will be having a pre-Kentucky Derby party. I came from Kentucky. That's home for me. And so traditionally we have held it the day before the Kentucky Derby. Our academic calendar has now changed. And so the Kentucky Derby will be on commencement weekend. So we're doing it a week before. But we get gussied up. We wear the hats and the bow ties and the whole thing. And we have Kentucky foods and maybe some Kentucky beverages. And
I was going to say, you got to have the mint julep.
Yeah, well, it's funny. My twin brother actually is a vice president of a bourbon company. So we have and he would remind me, the official bourbon of the Kentucky Derby. So we do have some of those products available, and it's just a great time for us to relax. And it's always on the last day of the semester. So it's a good time to just let go. The other piece, and it's unbelievably time consuming, but it's so worth it, is that every employee gets a handwritten note from me at some point during the year. Everyone gets a holiday card from me with a handwritten note on it. And then, I try to supplement that with other notes and stuff throughout the year. But folks understand that time commitment that it takes to do that. And I've gotten really wonderful feedback from folks about that. It's laborious. But it also brings me a lot of joy to think about each and every individual as I'm writing those notes. And Wilson's a small enough place that I actually do know. I mean, I know all of them by face or generally in some way regards, but most of them I know on a personal basis. And so it's a big task, but it has paid dividends. And it started from the pandemic when I wrote everyone a note because I felt like we needed some, just some uplifting words in a really challenging time.
Yeah. That is terrific, Wes. I congratulate you for all of your efforts in this, social connection space. It sounds like you're doing a tremendous job. I will say this has been a wonderful opportunity to hear about what you're doing and to learn more about you and just to get advice and get really a lot of learning for me on how to do some of this stuff better. And I hope this will be of service to lots of people out there, certainly to other presidents who are confronting the exact same kind of challenges we are, but other people in other walks of life can learn from the great things that you do. And that you're so intentional about the different things that you're doing to get to all of these different folks in these different groups. I think that's just tremendous. And I congratulate you. I applaud you for what you're doing. I just think it's tremendous. So thank you for being here with us today for this podcast episode. And thank all of you out there for joining us. We've been speaking with Wes Fugate, who's the president of Wilson College. And we really hope that you've enjoyed this installment. Until next time, this is President Dan, Pres Dan, I'm going to follow Wes, signing off. See you next time.